After my daughter's funeral, I never told my son-in-law about the timber rights she left me, or the $600,000 sitting in a trust he didn't know existed. 2 weeks later, he sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me they were putting me in a care home. I just nodded. I had already moved everything. He had no idea what was coming. My name is Walter. I'm 64 years old, and for almost 40 years I worked as a structural inspector, climbing scaffolding on bridges and grain elevators across 3 states, making sure things that looked solid on the outside weren't rotting through underneath. It's a strange skill to carry into old age. You start looking at people the same way you look at steel. You start noticing the hairline cracks before anyone else does. My wife Doreen passed 11 years ago, cancer, fast and cruel. After that, it was just me and our daughter Callie. She was our only child. And after Doreen died, Callie became the center of my whole world. I watched her grow into a sharp, funny, generous woman. She married a man named Trent when she was 28, and I'll admit, I had my doubts about him from the start. But Callie loved him, and I trusted her judgment over my own gut feeling. That was my first mistake. 4 weeks ago, my world ended for the second time. Callie was driving home from her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, and a truck ran a red light. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. I got the call at 11:40 at night, and I don't remember much of what happened after that. I remember standing in a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and coffee, and I remember thinking that I had now buried a wife and a daughter, and that a man isn't supposed to survive both of those things and still be standing. Trent and their son, my grandson Miles, who's 12, came to stay in my house for a while after the funeral, so we can all grieve together, Trent said. I appreciated it at the time. I thought maybe grief had softened something in him. I was wrong about that too. Then, last Thursday, I got a call from a woman named Patricia Alvarez, an estate attorney downtown. She told me she needed to see me regarding a private arrangement Callie had set up 2 years earlier. I was confused. Callie and I talked about everything. She used to call me every Sunday just to complain about Trent's spending habits and ask my advice about the mortgage. I didn't think she had secrets from me. I drove to Patricia's office the next morning. She handed me a sealed envelope and a set of keys and told me Callie had come to her 2 years ago, alone, without Trent's knowledge, to set up an irrevocable trust in my name. Inside the envelope was a letter in Callie's handwriting, along with legal documents for a piece of land up in the Adirondacks that had belonged to my late father-in-law, land that had been quietly leased to a logging and land management company for the last 6 years, generating steady income that Callie had been redirecting into a trust instead of touching herself. In the letter, Callie explained everything. She said she'd learned 2 years ago that Trent had a gambling problem she'd kept hidden from me out of embarrassment, and that she'd started worrying about what would happen to Miles and to me if something ever happened to her and Trent got his hands on everything. She wrote that she loved Trent, but she wasn't blind to him. She'd been quietly building a wall around this one piece of her family's legacy so that no matter what happened, Miles would have something untouchable waiting for him when he turned 18, and I would have security in case Trent ever tried to push me aside. She said she was sorry for keeping it from me, but she needed at least one secret that was completely safe. The trust held the land, and it held $600,000 in accumulated leasing income that had built up over 6 years, sitting untouched, waiting. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside Patricia's office for a long time after that, holding the letter against my chest, crying harder than I had since the day I got the phone call about the accident. My daughter had been protecting me from beyond the grave. She had seen a danger I hadn't wanted to see myself, and she'd built a lifeboat for her father and her son, without either of us ever knowing it existed. I drove home, already turning over ideas in my head. I thought about using the money to help Miles with college, to maybe finally take the Alaska cruise Doreen and I always talked about and never got to do, to set something up so Trent could get real help for his gambling if he wanted it. Grief was still sitting on my chest like a stone, but for the first time in weeks I felt like I had something to hold on to besides sorrow. I pulled into my driveway and something felt wrong immediately. There was a moving van parked at an angle across my lawn, tire tracks cut into the grass Doreen used to be so proud of. My front door was propped open with one of my own dining chairs. My stomach dropped before I even got out of the car. Inside, my house was being taken apart. 2 men in gray work shirts were wrapping my recliner in plastic. Another was carrying my late wife's china cabinet toward the truck, the one piece of furniture I'd told Callie 100 times I wanted to leave to Miles someday. Boxes lined my hallway, taped shut, my whole life sealed into cardboard, while I was gone for 2 hours. And standing in the middle of my own living room, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like he owned the place, was Trent. I stood in the doorway, and for a second I just watched, my chest tight, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My own son-in-law 4 weeks after burying my daughter, tearing my house apart without a word of warning. "Walter," Trent said, turning around, that easy salesman's smile sliding onto his face the way it always did, right before he asked me for something. "Hey, you're back early. We were going to explain everything tonight." "Explain what?" I said, keeping my voice level even though my hands had started to shake. "Why are strangers taking Doreen's china cabinet out of my house, Trent?" He set the clipboard down on my coffee table with the same careful, patient motion you'd use with someone fragile, someone who might break. "Walter, I need you to hear me out before you get upset," he said. "You're 64 years old, and you just lost your daughter. Living alone in a house this size, dealing with the yard, the stairs, all of it, it's too much right now. Miles and I talked about it, and we think it's time you moved somewhere safer. Somewhere with people around you." He slid a glossy brochure across the coffee table. Sunrise Meadows Assisted Living. The cover read, a photo of gray-haired strangers sitting in a common room under fluorescent lights. "You want to put me in a home?" I said slowly. "We want you taken care of," Trent said, his voice dipping into something warm and reasonable that made my skin crawl. "You've been through a trauma, Walter. Grief does things to people. We just want to make sure you're safe." For 1 week, foolish moment, I actually felt sorry for him. I thought about Callie's letter, about the gambling debt she'd mentioned, and I wondered if Trent was drowning in something he hadn't told me about, doing something desperate because he was cornered. My hand actually drifted toward my jacket pocket where I'd tucked the trust documents. I almost told him everything right then. I almost offered to help him. Then my eyes landed on a stack of papers sitting on the coffee table next to the brochure, half covered by a folder. The top page had bold black letters across the header, "Durable Power of Attorney," and at the bottom, next to a notary stamp, was a signature that was supposed to be mine. I have never in my life seen that signature before. It was close enough to fool a stranger, but I've signed my name on inspection reports for 40 years. That was not my hand. The warmth drained out of me instantly, replaced by something colder and much more focused. "What exactly is that paper next to the brochure?" "Trent," I said, keeping my voice soft, letting it shake just slightly. "I don't remember signing anything since the funeral." Something flickered across his face, gone almost as fast as it appeared. He glanced toward the kitchen, and that's when I noticed Miles wasn't around, and a woman I didn't recognize, some assistant or associate of Trent's, stepped in from the hallway carrying a folder of her own. "Walter, we didn't want to spring this on you," she said, her voice syrupy with rehearsed sympathy. "Trent explained to us that you've been struggling since Callie passed. Confusion, memory lapses. He said your doctor mentioned some concerns." "My doctor said nothing of the sort," I said. "I saw him 3 weeks ago. My blood pressure's better than his, probably. It's a lot to process," Trent said gently, stepping closer, resting a hand on my shoulder the way you'd calm a spooked animal. "We forged the paperwork because we didn't want you to have to deal with lawyers and forms on top of everything else, Walter. We're trying to make this easy for you. We're just protecting you." There it was, confessed to my face, wrapped in the language of love. I felt the old engineer's instinct kick in, the same one that used to keep me calm 40 feet up on a rusted catwalk with the wind picking up. You don't panic when you find the crack. You document it. You plan the repair. You do not, under any circumstances, let the structure know that you know it's about to fail. So I let my shoulders drop. I let my eyes go glassy and confused. I looked down at the fake power of attorney like I barely understood what I was reading. "You really think this is best?" I said, my voice cracking exactly the way a frightened old man's voice would crack. "I know it's hard to hear," Trent said, squeezing my shoulder, and I watched real relief spread across his face, the relief of a man who believes he's just won. "But yes, this is what's best for you." I nodded slowly, shuffled toward my bedroom like the weight of the world had finally caught up with my knees, and closed the door softly behind me. The moment the latch clicked, I stood up straight. My hands were steady. My mind was already 3 steps ahead. I stayed in that bedroom for the rest of the day, listening to the movers hauling out 40 years of my life piece by piece, and I let them believe every second of it was working. When Trent's associate brought me a plate of food that evening, bland chicken and rice, I thanked her weakly and barely touched it. Exactly the performance a broken old man would give. That night, I heard Trent on the back porch a little after midnight, pacing, his voice low and sharp in a way that didn't match how he talked to me. I stood in the dark kitchen and listened through the cracked window. He wasn't talking to Miles or to the woman from earlier. He was talking to someone about the Friday deadline and getting the funds moved before anyone starts asking questions. His voice had an edge of real fear in it, something raw underneath all that practiced warmth. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed, turning over every version of the truth I could find. Something had scared Trent badly enough to forge documents and empty my house in a matter of days. That kind of fear doesn't come from concern for an old man's safety. That kind of fear comes from debt. The next morning, once Trent and Miles had left, Miles for school, Trent for whatever business he claimed he still had, I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it either. I went into the small office off the garage where Trent kept his laptop charging, and I turned it on. I had watched him type his password enough times over the years, his late mother's birthday plus his old fraternity number, and it opened right up. What I found made my hands go cold. Trent owed almost $340,000 to an online sports betting operation that had, over the last year, quietly rolled his debt into the hands of a private lending group that did not send polite reminder emails. There were threatening messages in a folder he'd tried to hide, references to collateral and final notice, and a deadline that lined up exactly with the pacing I'd overheard on the porch. And buried in his email, a message to a real estate agent asking how quickly a 5-bedroom house could be listed, as is, cash only, no delays. He wasn't protecting me. He was liquidating me. I kept digging, and that's when I found the message that actually stopped my heart for a moment. An email exchange with the hospital where Callie had worked, dated the week before her accident, in which Trent had asked a colleague of hers, quietly, almost casually, whether Callie's life insurance policy would still pay out if she wasn't actively driving for work at the time. My daughter had died in a car accident on her way home from a normal shift. But reading that email, seeing the calculation behind it, seeing that he had been thinking about her death as a financial event before it happened, something in me went very still and very quiet. I am not going to pretend I know for certain what happened on that road that night. I don't have proof of that. Not yet. And I want to be honest about that instead of inventing more than I actually found. What I do know is that 4 weeks after my daughter's death, the man who claimed to be devastated by losing her was already 3 steps into selling my house to pay off men who threatened him, and he had been quietly asking questions about her insurance policy before she ever got behind the wheel that night. I closed the laptop, walked outside into the cold morning air, and stood on my own back porch for a long time, breathing. Then I went to work. I called Patricia, the attorney, and told her everything. About the forged power of attorney, the brochure, the debt, the insurance email. She went quiet on the phone for a moment, and then she said, "Walter, I want you to come into my office right now, and I want you to bring anything you printed or photographed from that laptop." Within 2 hours, she had connected me with a colleague of hers who specialized in elder financial abuse and had, as it turned out, already flagged 2 prior complaints against the same lending group Trent owed money to. Over the next 3 days, while Trent believed I was quietly packing my essential belongings for the move to Sunrise Meadows, I was in Patricia's office instead, using the trust income to legally transfer the deed of my house into a newly formed holding entity we named Alder Ridge Properties, structured so that my name never appeared on a single public document. A forged power of attorney can only ever control what its supposed principal actually owns. The day I signed that transfer, my house legally stopped being mine, and it was never going to be Trent's either. Patricia also quietly reached out to the lending group's registered agent, and using a portion of the trust funds, Alder Ridge Properties purchased Trent's delinquent debt outright, the same way you'd buy a mortgage note. It cost real money, more than I was entirely comfortable spending, but it meant that the men Trent was afraid of no longer had any reason to come looking for him. It also meant that the debt he owed now belonged, quietly and invisibly, to me. The night before the house closing Trent had arranged, I asked him if I could sign one final form myself, so I could feel like I still had some say in things. I made my hand tremble as I signed it, deliberately messy, exactly like a frightened, confused old man, too tired to read the fine print. Trent looked so relieved when he saw that signature, so certain he had finally won, that he actually hugged me. I let him. That night, once he and Miles had gone to bed, I did something else I'm not proud of, but don't regret. I left a small recorder, the kind used for dictation, tucked behind the leg of the couch where Trent liked to sit and take his late-night calls. I had bought it 2 days earlier at an electronics store across town. Cash, no questions. At around 1 in the morning, I sat in my room with a small earpiece connected to it and listened. Trent was on the phone with someone, and I recognized after a moment that it was the associate woman from before, someone he referred to as his partner, in more ways than one. It became clear. They talked about the closing the next morning, the wire transfer, how the debt would finally be cleared. Then Trent said something that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. "I still can't believe how easy this went," he said. Once Callie was gone, the old man barely put up a fight. "You worried for nothing," she said. "You made sure she wouldn't be driving distracted that night, and everything else just fell into place after that." I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, my whole body going numb, my ears ringing louder than any words coming through that earpiece. I am telling you honestly, I do not know the precise mechanics of what he did. I don't know if he tampered with her car, or texted her something designed to pull her attention at the worst possible moment, or something else entirely. What I know is what I heard, spoken plainly, without a shred of guilt, by the man who was supposed to love my daughter, confirming that her death had not been only an accident. I did not cry that night. I want to be honest about that too. Something past grief took over, something cold and very clear, the same feeling I used to get standing on a bridge deck finding a crack that meant the whole structure was compromised and had to come down before it hurt someone. Trent was that crack. He had been that crack for years, and none of us had looked closely enough to see it. I called Patricia at 6 in the morning. I told her everything, and I told her to call the district attorney's office, not just about the fraud and the forged documents, but about what I'd heard on that recording. She told me plainly, and honestly, that a recorded statement alone might not be enough to reopen a closed accident investigation, but it would absolutely be enough to hand to detectives, and combined with the insurance emails, it was enough to get their attention immediately. She made the calls before the sun was fully up. The closing was scheduled for 10 that morning at the real estate office downtown. Trent and his associate walked in dressed sharp, ready to sign away a house that no longer belonged to either of us, expecting a buyer with a check. Instead, when the door to the conference room opened, it was Patricia, and behind her, 2 detectives from the county sheriff's department. I walked in last. Trent's face went the color of old drywall the moment he saw me standing there in a pressed shirt instead of the shuffling, defeated man he'd left behind at the house the night before. "Walter," he stammered, "what is this?" "This house isn't yours to sell," Patricia said calmly, sliding a folder across the table. "It hasn't been for 3 days. It belongs to a holding company. And that debt you've been so desperate to pay off? We bought it. You don't owe those men anything anymore. You owe us." I watched confusion and relief and dawning horror move across his face in the space of about 4 seconds, the fastest I have ever seen a man's expression completely fall apart. Then one of the detectives stepped forward and asked Trent and the woman beside him to come with them regarding an ongoing investigation into the death of Callie Reyes. Trent's legs actually gave out. He grabbed the edge of the conference table, and for one moment he looked at me the way Miles used to look at me when he'd broken something and knew he was caught. That same childish, useless hope that somehow I would fix it for him. "Walter, please," he said. "I loved her. You have to believe me." I looked at him for a long moment, thinking about 40 years of climbing steel structures looking for exactly this kind of failure hidden under a calm surface, and about my daughter's careful, quiet letter protecting a father and a son she wouldn't live to see grow older. "You stopped being my daughter's husband the night you asked a nurse whether her insurance would pay out if she wasn't driving for work," I said. "Everything after that was just you finishing the job." They let him out in handcuffs. His associate didn't say a single word, just stared at the floor the whole way to the elevator. The investigation that followed took months. I won't pretend the legal process gave me clean, immediate justice, because real life rarely does. What it gave me, eventually, was an arrest, a trial date, and enough evidence from Trent's phone and financial records, cross-referenced with the toll cameras near the intersection where Callie died, to support a charge that went far beyond fraud. I'm not going to sit here and tell you every detail landed exactly the way I wanted, because some days it still doesn't feel like enough. But it was real, and it was the truth finally standing in the daylight instead of buried under a rehearsed smile. Miles came to live with me permanently after that, and it took him a long time to understand why his father wasn't coming home, and even longer to stop blaming himself for things that were never his to carry. We go up to the land in the Adirondacks together most summers now. He's 13, quiet, careful in the way kids get after they've seen too much, too young, but he laughs more than he used to. He knows about the trust his mother set up for him, and he knows it's waiting for him when he's older, untouched, exactly the way she planned it. I never sold the house. I couldn't stand the thought of it changing hands into some stranger's mortgage after everything that happened inside those walls. Instead, working with Patricia, I turned it into something else. It's a small transitional home now for grieving families, mothers and fathers who've lost a child, or in some cases lost a spouse to something ugly and hidden that took a while to come to light. There's a room in there with Callie's photograph on the wall, and a plaque that just says her name and the years she lived, nothing more. Some mornings, up at the ranch land, I stand out on the porch with my coffee, and I watch the fog burn off the tree line, and I think about the crack I almost missed. 40 years of my career, I made a living finding the hairline fractures that other people walked right past. I nearly walked past the biggest one of my life, sitting in my own living room with a clipboard in his hand, calling it love. If there's one thing I'd want to say to anyone listening to this, it's this. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect, and the people who love you the most will sometimes be the ones standing guard over that vulnerability without you even knowing it, the way my daughter stood guard over mine long after she was gone. But trust has to be something you keep checking, keep testing, the same way you'd check a bolt on a bridge you drive over every single day. Just because it held yesterday doesn't mean it isn't failing today. Watch closely, ask the hard questions, and never let a calm voice and a rehearsed smile talk you out of what your gut has already told you is true. If Walter's story moved you, if it made you angry, or made you think of someone in your own family you've been trusting a little too easily, tell me about it in the comments below. I'd like to hear how you'd have handled it. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next story.